further ado, I'd like to welcome Mike King. He's a senior developer at VEHIKL, and he'll be talking about React and NestJS and monorepositories. So welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Margot. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm Mike. I've been a developer at VEHIKL for almost 3 years come September. My stack of choice is generally JavaScript through and through, specifically around TypeScript. So I'm going to go over a lot of stuff. I'm not going to try to get too deep into it because I know there's going to be a lot of questions one way or another. So try not to get overwhelmed, and I hope I address everything towards the end. So off the hop, these projects that I'm working in right now are being scaffolded using Nx. And what is Nx? Well, Nx is an extensible set of development tools for monorepos. I'll allow you to research that further, but I'll just give a couple high-level jot points. So it provides first-class support for many different front-end and back-end technologies. It provides a consistent development experience that's powered by an advanced CLI. There's build caching and other various efficiencies for your regular workflow, and it comes with out-of-the-box integrations for various tools like Cypress, Jest, TypeScript, Prettier, and more. Now, why a monorepo? Well, with a monorepo, it helps enforce the ability to keep your code dry, to keep reusing the same code across different aspects of your application or the various libraries that compose of it. Your changes are atomic, so if you're introducing a new feature or a code change, you're able to apply that change across all of your different projects and libraries in a single commit, instead of having to coordinate that across multiple different versions or repositories. The other thing is tooling mobility. So using a single entry point with consistent commands for building and testing your applications and your services, it allows a developer to be onboarded much more quickly and get up and running. And next we have dependency singularity, which is essentially we have one single version of our third-party dependencies in our node modules and one package JSON entry point. So that way we never run into the problem of, oh, you're using this older version of library X. It's not compatible with this version of library X in your other tool. So that is a great boon for a developer. There are other tools like Lerna or Yarn Workspaces, which both help optimize the installation of node modules, but they don't enable the same monorepo style development that Nx does. That doesn't mean that they can't be used with Nx. It is possible to combine the two of them. Now, for getting set up, you want to install the Nx CLI. And depending on your IDE of choice, mine is VS Code. They also have a plugin. And this plugin allows you to scaffold whatever you need without having to worry about what the exact command was in the CLI. And to add more commands, you're allowed to author your own, or you can install ones that already exist. For instance, for doing React, and I think, I'm in the Nest repository right now, but I can show that one anyway. We'll require the Nest package. The name is rather easy to remember. Nx is hosted by @narwhal with out the H or the A's. Yeah, so that's a good spot to begin. I'll be doing this talk around two different repositories that we're currently hosting under the VEHIKL domain. We have NestJS testing. This is a Nx project that's focused mainly around NestJS, which is the backend framework. And the other one is React testing. And this one's focused mainly just on the React application. I did have aspirations of combining them together to kind of give the wholesome full stack experience. Alas, I ran out of time, so we'll do them one after the other. Now, the Nx monorepo layout, I'll start there. React's a good spot to begin. I know Lucas has been doing some React projects with you guys, so it probably won't be that jarring to look at. The main things you want to notice about this repository is we have an applications folder, apps. This is where any of the applications we're going to make will go. So whether it's our NestJS backend, our front-end React application, our front-end Vue application, or our end-to-end tests, those are all considered applications. Another one that's important is libs. These are any reusable libraries that we want to use within any of our applications or even other libraries within this repository. The other one is tools. That is generally where you would put any developmental tools that you use in your project. So you have schema generation or migration tools, anything like that. That's where you'd probably throw it. Now, there's a bunch of standard scripts that come out of the box with Nx. So this entire project was scaffolded using the CLI. I won't get into that because I want us to be getting into the fun parts of React and Nest, but I do want to make sure we have a common foundation to go off of. So a bunch of the scripts that come out, we have start, that's sort of like your developmental server command. So for React, we would be running yarn start, whatever the name of our React project is. And that will also include live reloading. Build for when we want to build it for production or development build. Test when we want to run our tests. Linting, performing end-to-end tests, and more. Another really powerful one that this provides is dep graph. Dep graph will actually give you a visual display of all the different dependencies within your repository, and I'll just demonstrate that here. Now, bear with me. I am on Windows right now, so the automatic URL opening is not a thing. But as you can see right here, we have our Web UI project, that's React. Web UI E2E is the Cypress test suite, so it has an implicit dependency on Web UI. And Web UI uses UI components. There's also a Cypress test suite scaffolded for the React library components, but I haven't gotten into that, so just ignore that little guy there for now. That being said, let's get back into the React app here. So like I said at the start, we need to install Narwhal React. And if I head back down to my dev dependencies down here, we'll see Narwhal React. And what that does is it adds some schematics to our NX tool. So if I want to generate, say, a new React component or anything, I can go generate. It'll open up this command menu up here, and we'll see all the different schematics that have been installed in our packages. And as we scroll down, we'll see Narwhal React. So setting up an application, setting up a new library, a new component, a Redux store, Storybook configuration. All that comes out of the box once we install the Narwhal React package. Now, what does this app do that I'm going to be showing off to you and wanting us to sort of test and debug? Well, let's run it and we'll see what it has. That's not React. So a single entry point, we're starting the Web UI is what I named the React project. And it'll just spin up the React application with our live reload dev server. And I'll be serving at localhost 4200. So here's our little React app. And if you give me one moment, I will get what we need here. So this token is just a throwaway, so you're not going to be able to do anything nefarious with it. So keep that thought out of your head. So right now, this is just a 2-page React app. One is kind of the unauthenticated view, which is an entry form where we want you to give us an access token to GitHub, where we can communicate with the GitHub API on your behalf. Once we have that token, we're just going to display a list of repositories. It's a dead simple, rather stupid app, but I'll demonstrate what that looks like right now. So plug in a valid API key, submit, and we should be getting a list of repositories in here. We are not at this moment, and we'll find out. Oh, I think this is actually an older version. All right. But looking at the network tab, we are getting those repositories back. So we could have that be one of our to-dos at the end of this. Anyways, that's a high level.
Reminder, this is getting recorded, so don't forget to change your GitHub key.
Oh, definitely. Thank you. I did put minimal permissions on that one. It's a throwaway account, so it should be okay, but thanks for the reminder there. Actually, that brings up another point, which I might as well speak of. GitHub's normally pretty good about these things. So if you do commit a GitHub token to a public repository, they will scrape that, see it, invalidate it, and send you an email. So nice little tooling there. The next thing I'll want to show here is testing this application. So we do have the test entry point. And I'll put it in watch mode just so that we can see the live reloading occur. The suite has a bunch of tests. Some of them are just stupidly stubbed. The rest actually do things. And let's go take a look at what's entailed within those tests. So we have the enter token form. The end-to-end test, I think, is a good one to do. Oh, no, actually, I canceled that one out. I think I picked up the wrong repo here. All right, let's do a little bit of a tour of the different things we have. So the index router, I think this is a valuable test for us to look at. And we'll look at the difference between unit testing the React app versus Cypress testing, the same application in the same flow. So the way we've set this up, we have a wrapping router component and this little authenticated router, which looks at whether you have a stored token or not. If you have a stored token, we'll show our auth router, which will just be that repositories view. If not, then we'll show the unauthenticated router, which currently just has that enter token path. So the test we have for that, we'll look at the setup first. So setting it up, we want to set up our auth context with a given token and a throwaway set token. Lucas, I assume you've covered React hooks in a previous talk.
We've done them in at least 4 other talks.
Okay, cool. So I won't get into that stuff. But basically, the way I've set this up is the router is wrapped in a context provider for your authentication, and that exposes 2 different values, the currently stored token or a function to set and update that token. So with that being known going into our test, so with our index router, we expect that it's going to set up and it's going to show you the unauthenticated router. Now, we're doing this very shallowly. We're actually going to mock what our unauthed and auth routers are with these custom components here. The reason we go with the data test ID, one of the methods that get exposed from the render function rely off of that test ID data field. So by us throwing in just a custom name on these guys, we can actually just drill down into that without having to do any further DOM dancing. So with that being said, we're going to set up the index router tests. Like we said here, by default, we're not going to have a token. It'll be empty. And so when we get by test ID fake auth router, that should pass. Get by test ID will fail if that component is not there. And by the same regard, we're going to do the same setup, but this time we're going to provide a API token. So a truthy value that's non-empty, we expect the auth router to be rendered. So that's looking at it from the perspective of a unit test. Now, the really cool thing that comes out of NX, which saves you a lot of trouble of setup, is Cypress. So I'm going to actually switch over to my other computer for that one because Windows video drivers are not quite there yet, but Linux is. So let me just show you some of the Cypress tests here, and then we'll actually look at what it looks like. So our application test, I'll bump up the size here. This is probably a bit better. So I have that GitHub API token that's plugged into my environment variables. We're going to set up an env for this Cypress run, and it's going to pull this value. Before each test, we want it to visit the root directory. And then here's our different test cases. Right off the bat, you should be redirected to the enter token page. We don't have a route right at the root. When it sees that you don't have an API key, that's where you should go. The next one is that it should redirect to the repos page after submitting a valid token. So given that we visited the root directory, we're going to visit enter token. We're going to find the enter token input, type in this GitHub API token that we're providing via env. We're going to click the submit button, and then we're going to verify that the URL includes repositories. And then I think that last test is probably going to fail due to the reason that we saw earlier that we are not seeing the repository list show up, but we'll find out. I feel like I did a shoddy purge earlier. And then the last test, I included a button to clear your token, which should insert kind of like logout behavior. So once you've hit repositories, when you click the clear token button, we shouldn't be in the repositories route anymore, and we should be in enter token. So really simple flows to validate against, but we don't have to write any unit tests against what is actually going on in the front end. We can just think about it from a user's perspective and actually allow that flow to go through. Now, without further ado, we'll watch these things likely fail because I don't have very much confidence in what I just did. Now, what this has to do is still compile your front end, serve it, and then it'll open the Cypress UI tool, which will show you the different tests that you have set up. In this case, we just have the app spec, and you can run them. Firefox is experimental if you want to run it in Firefox. Cypress is built primarily for Chrome. Let's say we want to run these app tests. So you'll see it's actually visually going through the whole thing. Running our tests on the left, it shows every step that the particular test went through. We can visually watch what happened. So this first one, just the redirect. So arriving at home, we expect you to go to enter token. So that's where our assertion is, and that's where we're at. We have coverage reports coming at the end. The other test is redirecting to the repos page after submitting a valid token. So starting at home, we go to enter token. We're going to find the enter token input, which we could actually click through and see these behaviors. We're going to type in that key, which that's where it's going to be typed in. We're going to find the button that contains submit, click it, which results in a backend post to GitHub's GraphQL endpoint. And then we're going to assert that we're on repositories after the fact. I have other tests there, just asserting the different repositories are being shown. So it looks like I do have a code difference between my desktop and my laptop. You may remember that we didn't have any visual after we entered the token on the desktop, but now we do. These are the different repositories that are listed under my username right now. So just verifying that they exist. And then that last flow I was talking about. So pretty much just building up the same previous steps, but trying to complete all the way to the end. So we've gone in, we've entered a token, we've gone to the repositories page, and then I'm going to find that clear token button. I'm going to clear it, and then I'm going to assert that we've gone back to the enter token page. And that is really Cypress in a nutshell. It's a lot more powerful than that. There are actually, they provide cloud services for it, which I haven't gotten into. I do not profess to be an expert in these regards, but I am quite fascinated with them, and they're pretty cool to see. Now that's it for the laptop. Let me switch back over to the desktop here. So yeah, we talked about unit tests in the React app. We talked a bit about the UI end-to-end tests with Cypress. Another neat thing we've added in here is test coverage. The way the test coverage is run, I've actually made a little handy extra script in the package JSON for that. So it's running your typical test command, except providing the code coverage option. So it's just a convenience. We are in test web UI coverage. We need to go to the front of that. And I'll just run my unit tests and give us a coverage report at the end. It's not perfect right now. There's a couple of things I'd like to fix about it. For instance, this generated GitHub GraphQL SDK. There's no reason for us to be checking the coverage on that. That's a generated file. There's a couple here that have rather shoddy test coverage, which we'd like to improve. But otherwise, a lot of things have 100%. So thumbs up for us. The other cool thing with that is we've actually set it up to use GitHub Actions as a CI pipeline to automatically run these tests and then report on the coverage. For those of you who haven't used GitHub Actions to facilitate your CI, it's dead simple to set up. If you know the steps you want to do, you're already halfway there. You can go through their UI as one option, and they'll kind of give you a GUI to set up this file with a little bit of IntelliSense, or you can do it yourself. Ultimately, GitHub looks for a .github folder with a workflows directory, and any YAML file in there, it'll consider a workflow. You can give it a custom name, specify triggers and specific branches to watch, file patterns to ignore, tags to ignore, etc. And then the different jobs that CI is going to entail. In this case, we only have one job, and that's going to be called build. The image we want it to run on is the latest Ubuntu, and then the steps. The steps run sequentially. You can define multiple concurrent jobs if you'd like, or define jobs that depend on other jobs. There's a whole bunch of depth you can get into in scaffolding CI or CD. But basically what we want to do here is we're going to check out our code. We're going to run npm install. This is a GitHub action for installing your node packages that actually handles caching it right out of the box, so you don't have to worry about writing that yourself. Next, we're going to generate the GitHub SDK. I didn't show you this part, but basically it's a type-safe SDK to use against GitHub's GraphQL endpoint. So that way we have type safety when we're using, say, those repositories, which I can get into a little bit more once we get past the kind of more tutorial side of this. I'm not worrying about linting right now. Then we're going to get into our unit tests, which necessitate having a GitHub API token because we actually do want to hit it. We're going to do a real integration test. Not normally a best practice. However, this is a rather contrived and small case, which shouldn't be exploding that token too frequently. You'll notice it's the coverage version of that test. So it's actually going to do a coverage report of these unit tests. Next, we'll do the Cypress end-to-end tests in our CI pipeline, and then we'll finish it off with reporting on how our coverage was for the test run. This last one down here is kind of developmental for me. I haven't gotten the end-to-end tests reporting accurately yet, but we'll see what happens. And that being said, I think, where's the repository here? React testing. Now that's set up for the reporting. It'll actually append it to your pull request as a comment. This one's failing, so I'll show you the Nest one instead. Based off of the GitHub token that you provide, it'll comment on behalf of that user. I gave it one of my tokens, so it's commenting on my behalf. The total coverage for this PR hit 84.38%. And then you can expand it to see a full breakdown of all the files, their branches, function, and line coverage, as well as which lines are uncovered. And all these are links actually into the pull request itself. So Hammer Squad service line 68. Well, let's go take a look at that. Oh, I think I might have force pushed to this one. Oh, that's a brilliant example. We'll get back into that in a moment. So yeah, the other big topic I wanted to talk about was debugging your React application. And there's a couple different angles that we want to look at that from. One is your currently running React application. So when you're interacting with it, what exactly is going on? The other scenario is when you're running your tests, which are a bit more of a contrived example. But if you're practicing TDD, it allows you to really narrow down what you want to validate in your code base. Now, for those of you who've tried it, testing in JavaScript can be a little bit challenging to get set up and running off the hop. So that's another thing that these test repositories are going to do. They're going to show you some setups that work right out of the box right now. For this React application, for instance, we have three different options, or two options here right now. Yeah, I totally missed a commit earlier. The first one, when you have your running React application, you want to debug it. So this one here will launch a Chrome instance in debug mode, and it will attach to the source directory of your React project. In this case, it's the web UI. And I can show what that looks like here if I just do this. So let's start our React app. So that'll be up and running in a moment. So here's our application. I'm going to bump these side by side just so that it's easier to see on a single screen. So we can't use this instance because this Chrome window is opened without the debugger enabled. But if we go through our debug tools here, we'll have the different debug configs, which were in that launch.json file. So we're going to launch Chrome against localhost. And just so that we have a better idea of what we're going to be looking at, let's say we start a debugger inside the index router, maybe right before we're going to return it. So we're definitely going to hit it. So we'll start our debugger. Just going to use F5 for that. And it's opened a new Chrome window. And we're already paused in Visual Studio Code. We are already at the breakpoint. Hold on. Perfect. So here we are. We can hover over the values, see what they are. We can drill into them over in the left panel here. We can even execute against them using this little guy up here. So we can say, what do we have access to right now? Say console log token. Right now the token's null. We haven't provided one. Let's throw some more breakpoints throughout this app. Let's say in our enter token, maybe inside this use effect. That seems like a reasonable spot to check out. So we've stepped through, it's now entering our use effect, and we see that value right now is nothing. This value comes from whatever our token was. Yeah. So we'll go back to our application, see that. So this is kind of like a high level, how the debugger works for you. You can just set your breakpoints arbitrarily throughout your code and evaluate it in line instead of taking the extremely old school version of console.log. So yeah, if they come in here, let's see the valid check will be kicked off when our value changes. So yeah, if I punch something in here, submit it, we're going to hit our breakpoint again, and we can actually drill through what these results are as they come back before we set our token. So jump through these breakpoints, going to get the rate limit, updating from loading status, etc. That is not a valid one, so it bailed. And if I take that good token, step through here, so it's good token, it'll invoke the get rate limit. Loading, not loading, and we have data. So it's going to set that token because it came back as a truthy value. And now we're back to our router, and we should see that the router that's going to come back is the auth router. So that'll show our repositories page. So that's kind of how you can walk through with the debugger, see what's going on, and expedite your development flow. Towards the end of this session, if we have time, we'll kind of work through and try to complete a couple to-dos I have on this project with that flow. And the other one I was talking about was debugging your tests. Now, I know I'm missing the single test here, so I'll have to resort to the full test suite, unfortunately. Actually, no, we could probably add it pretty quick. The only difference between running the full test suite and running an individual test, see how we're executing the test, -I, no cache, watch all, no code coverage, and the config to use is in our workspace apps, web UI, which is React app, that just config. If we provide one more argument, which I'm going to poach from the Nest app over here, this variable right here, file base name, no extension. So that's like we're passing it right in jest, so it'll know which file we're currently on. So with that being said, without further ado, let's head back to that index router test, for instance. We'll throw in a breakpoint in here. I'll stop the debugger that I have currently running. We'll pick the, I might as well give that a more specific name so that we can pick it. Launch, jest, current test. So, adjust our current test. And we'll see that we're going to hit these breakpoints. So first, we're going to hit the index router. We're using the real index router. This test is for it, so we're not going to mock it at all. And continue to step through. So it's set it up. It's come back. And now we can check it. So we can see our container. We can drill into it. And yeah, that's how you can set up your debugging for your just tests. You can drill right into your code, or you can drill into your tests to check your expectations line up. And I think one last thing I want to touch on the React side is the UI components. So like I was mentioning at the start of this conversation, there are three main components to an NX repo: apps, libs, and tools. Libs is for the reusable libraries that you want to use, that you want to stop polluting maybe the body of your application with. So one really good spot to start with that: UI components. Your React application is likely littered with reusable components, whether it's an input field, a button, an icon, an entire form, maybe. In this repository, we have included a single input form right now that's composable. I actually have another example I could show at one point. Let's say fully composable form. And what we can do is, some of you may not be familiar with Storybook, which is a component library that you can use for React or Vue. It works with any of the front-end frameworks. And right now I have that just being set up with Yarn Storybook. So head back to our UI components. So right now we just have a single input form, which is a rather stupid form. It's just got one input field and a submit button. These are the various things it takes in. It needs a submit function, which takes that value. It needs some text values to place on the form itself, and the story we've set up for the Storybook using this component. So it's going to be a single input form, and these will be the values we pass into it. Once we serve that Storybook, we then have access to it in here. Here's our single input form, what it looks like, rather bare bones. We don't have any knobs configured on this one. We could do that rather quickly. I'm not going to worry about that right now, though. I thought I had the generic form in here, but I must have, again, lost that commit. Drat. It always happens when we're live. And like the other included aspects, we can also test the UI components library, or we can do the end-to-end tests. I touched on doing CI, so I guess we'll move over to the Nest application, and we'll look at how we can do debugging and testing in there. Close the React, and we've switched over to Nest. So yeah, where to begin with this one? Just like with the React application, we need the schematics in order to be able to execute this properly. So we have the narwhal nest package, and that has given us the nest schematics we need to generate guards, interceptors, modules, controllers, services, resolvers, what have you. Once that's been done, you can generate them. It'll scaffold it as expected. So in this repo, we have apps, we have our API. I don't have any libraries in here, but that is okay. I'll explain what this repository is supposed to do. So this repo is a bit of an exercise into trying to have a single API middleware that can work with multiple various third-party APIs and normalize the response shape. And I'll show, I think 3333 docs, and this one's set up with Swagger out of the box. For those of you who haven't used NestJS so much, setting up Swagger is rather trivial. It involves, once I get back to my main here, just a couple function setups. For the rest of it, it'll mainly be inferred from the types in your controllers. For additional detail, you'll just be required to apply decorators. So at /vehicle/ some given ID, in this case an office. This is an API operation that retrieves all the team members for a given office. It's under the vehicle tag. An API parameter it takes is office of office type, which is an enum. Example values for a city, and the values are in here. The OK response is when a valid office key is provided, and it's returning all the team members, and it returns a team member array. And the not found response happens when the office key that was provided was invalid. So yeah, in the event that the office you're asking for doesn't exist, we'll throw an exception. Otherwise, we'll return it from get vehicles. So looking at our Swagger doc here, a team member shape's rather small and simple. Again, these are rather contrived examples. So a team member has an ID, they have an office they work at, they have a name, and whether they play ping pong or not, just a simple Boolean. So in VEHIKL, we have get at API VEHIKL, whatever your office parameter is. And in this case, because it's an enum, it'll show you all the available values. Let's try it out. So at Forest City, we have one member, Jesse Carter. His ID is ping. He doesn't have a favorite color. He plays ping pong. If we look at KW, we have Alex Berry. And if we look at Hammer Squad, we have Brian. So that's one single API endpoint. And what you don't see behind the scenes is that actually is separate services that it's talking to. And we also have another exposed surface area other than your typical REST endpoints. And that is GraphQL, which at the /GraphQL route, you can access the graphical editor. Once you're in production mode, only the post request to /GraphQL will be accepted. So what we exposed on the GraphQL side was, instead of getting all the team members from an office, getting a particular team member by their ID in a given office. So I might as well show the types here, 1 sec. So we can see team member by ID. We know it needs an ID. We're passing an ID variable above. And we know it also needs a office, and we're passing in an office. And the different fields that can come back from that are ID, office, name, plays ping pong, and favorite color, blue, no red. Oh. So when we execute that and it's an actual team member, they come back. Let's say that team member doesn't exist. For instance, at the Hamilton office, the ID ping doesn't exist. We're going to get a 404. So we have two different service areas coming into this, and both of them are exposing different functionality around the same entity. So that's an idea I have for us to come in and try to refactor. There are some other things I do want to touch on with this, though. So we have our tests. This wouldn't be much of a talk without showing the tests off. So let's go to, I should give this its own tab. On our whole test suite, we'll see everything's happy. Keep these crossed for a moment. We don't have super test. We are missing things. Invalid login to, oh, I know what this is. I was actually halfway through adding something else. Back into what we care about here. So I'm going to say let's do debug tests in here, because unfortunately I got this into a broken state before the meetup. So I'll go through our setup of how we're going to resolve which service we want to use to get the team members. And then I'm going to walk through how that's actually architected. So at our top level, it's just a simple Nest app. We're bringing in the GraphQL module so that we're exposing a GraphQL endpoint, and then the VEHIKL module. The VEHIKL module is kind of fun. It involves this discovery package, which allows us to dynamically resolve providers in Nest at runtime without having to have them be set up and instantiated before it starts. So in this case, I'm not going to get into too many specifics of how that discovery works, but ultimately, in a nutshell, we're going to set up the Forest City office service, the KW office service, the Hammer Squad office service, and we're going to use them to override the office service factory, which matches the, this interface is used to retrieve a given office by their identifying string, and we're going to override this when the app boots up so that we know which ones can come back. So if we look down here, this office service factory, we're going to retrieve. If it doesn't exist, that's an error. Otherwise, we're going to override get office to use these office providers that we've resolved in the application, find the matching key that you're looking for, and return that discovered class instance so that you're then actually talking with the Forest City service or the KW service or the Hammer Squad service. So our end-to-end test, We're just going to set up a Nest application. We're going to include our vehicle module, spin it up. We're going to hit the get vehicles endpoint for the different providers, which we've just defined in an array. So Forest City key, KW key, Hammer Squad key, and the corresponding value we expect to come back when that's hit. We just have those being hard-coded for now. Again, these are rather contrived examples. So when you've spun up your Nest application, let's resolve the server from that. Let's do the get method at /vehicle/ whatever key. We expect it to be a 200 code, and we expect this value back. In the event that you use an office that we don't have a provider for, we expect a 422 and the unprocessable entity exception. In that case, we're just using unknown dude as the unknown office provider key. So I'll just throw that just test in. Can probably, I think a good way to go about this would be to jump into that vehicle module. If I toss my debugger in here, I'm going to kick this off. All right, so we've hit our breakpoint. This is the app booting up. We have some discovered office providers. There are 3 of them. There's the Forest City service, the KW service, the Hammer Squad service. Those are their keys. They've been discovered by looking for any provider with a meta at this symbol, Office Factory. We've decorated them so that they're being resolved that way. And then we're going to override the getOffice method so that when you pass in the office, we're going to then pull from those discovered office services and return that correct instance at that point. So this test right now, let me just double check this. First one's Forest City. So let's take a look at the Forest City service. We expect the get vehicles to be invoked. So I'm going to step through, and we hit get vehicles in the Forest City service. So at that point, we can just let that resolve come on through. And of course, these are going to fail because just by default it has a 5,000 millisecond timeout, and we were debugging for much longer than 5 seconds. And that's how we get the dynamic module resolution. So again, overriding that factory to resolve that office, which will mean that we are then going to pull back our office service, which adheres to this interface, either getting a team member by their ID or getting all the team members. And at a high level, that's how that works. I'll just show some of these off. So the office decorator is what we use to identify which ones of these services are of this type that we want to resolve by a key. So an office takes in a key, and that's what we'll use as the meta. So Forest City key for the Forest City office service. We have to say it's injectable to allow for DI in the Nest container. And the other services are implemented pretty much the same, but you can easily see how we have a very clearly defined interface or contract for how these services are interacted with. And all of them implement a mapping function to assert that all members come back into a valid team member shape. Yeah. Are there any questions right now around, I know some of this stuff is a little bit weird with the dynamic module resolvers. Margot, is there anything coming through, anything hot I should answer?
There are like 3 different questions. Some were asked during certain parts of your presentation. And
I can hop wherever.
So the first question was, how do you deal with migration with NestJS into an Nx workspace?
So that's okay. My understanding of that is you've already got a Nest project. You may have scaffolded it with an SCLI, and now you'd like to come over to NX and use that instead. Yeah, it's a slight bit more involved. You'd want to set up your Nest application in NX first, and then start migrating your stuff over, because you're going to want to use the scaffolded package JSON in the scaffolded project. So it will be a slight bit of a migration, moving it over piece by piece. The nice thing is once you actually get in there, the support for breaking apart your application into reusable libraries is second to none. I'll show a little thing here. I wasn't meaning to, but I think it'll be cool. I've just started exploring with in that regard. So this is a side project I'm working on right now. And I just started looking into actually pulling the API out into reusable library components. And I was able to fully abstract the data layer, API authentication, and the third-party APIs from my application entirely. Now the only stuff I actually have in my app folder are the app module, which ties everything together that the application needs, and anything that's currently work in progress and being developed. So now authentication, user retrieval, all that has been fully abstracted from me, and I don't have to worry about it anymore because it's stable. I know I kind of went past what the question was asking, but yeah, it's a little bit involved, but I do think it's worth it.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. There's one about what do failure messages look like in Cypress. Maybe we'll cover that in the Q&A after your talk.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. And then the other question that I think is out of time, can it watch for tags too?
Can it watch for tags too? I assume that was around the CI stuff, if I am correct on that. And if it is, the answer is yes. It definitely can watch on your tags. You can even exclude specific tags or specific branch patterns. It's very powerful.
And those are all the questions for now.
Cool.
Just so everyone's aware too, I'm going to drop the Menti link as well in the chat. So if you have any other questions, feel free to either drop them in the chat or also add them to menti.com, and then we'll queue them up for the Q&A.
Perfect. I think with that, I don't have anything else to show visually. If anyone had any questions on some of this stuff, I'd be happy to answer them to the best of my abilities. Otherwise, we can look at one of the different to-dos that I've got labeled out for these things, maybe with the Nest app, because I obviously missed a commit in the React app. Or if I blew everyone's minds and you digested it just fine, that is also okay and acceptable.
What's the chances of Vue plugins coming?
Vue plugins?
Yeah, like so. If you want to do this with Vue, and you need to use like Lerna right now, right?
Are you talking for NX? Or are you talking with Cypress? Or
yeah, I'm talking for NX. Sorry,
for NX. Unless I am mistaken, I believe Vue is already in there. Give me one moment. I unfortunately fell off the Vue train a while back while waiting for Vue 3. Not sure we've got a... no, looks like Vue is not in there yet. Yeah. It's getting there. My assumption is they're probably waiting for Vue 3 to officially get released, which is the boat that a lot of us have been sitting in for a while now.
Right, yeah. All right, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. That being said,
I just want to give you an update on that last question. There's an open issue on Vue for NX, and it looks like we can expect a pre-release published by the end of the month.
That is fantastic. The velocity that you get when you lock down the entire world is second to none. All right. Yeah, if there weren't any other questions, I'd be happy to get into a little bit of a demo coding session using the stuff that we've got so far. I have a couple different ideas for to-dos that we can do, say in the Nest app. Some rather low-hanging fruit, actually. So you'll notice that we have two different functions that the service exposes. The REST endpoint does all team members at a given office. The GraphQL endpoint does one team member at a given office. It'd be cool if both surface areas were able to do both functions. We don't have to worry about interacting with the service layer at that point. It's just the controller and the resolver. So I'm cool to go with that way, unless anyone is interested in anything else. I know I've got a couple other ideas here. So I had those ones for Nest, and on the React side, I don't really want to promote these ones because I missed that commit. So yeah, we'll do the Nest example. There. We want to do some debugging driven development, a little bit of TDD. So let's get this stuff set up. I'll start with serving the application. We want to make sure this stuff compiles. And like any good developer, we want to make sure that we're at least on our own branch. Cool. So I think a good one to begin with that would be pretty easy would be adding to our resolver all team members by office key. And just for a reminder, at our docs, so just by providing an office key, we'll give you an array of all the team members at that office. And in our GraphQL endpoint, we currently don't have that. We just have the one team member by ID. So let's add this. I think starting this in debug mode would be ideal. Oh, what? I don't know. I did show debugging for the Nest app, didn't I? Yeah. So we'll debug the API. Now, one thing we know for sure that doesn't exist is that resolver will not work yet because it doesn't exist. So our team member resolver, I'll go full screen with this while we're authoring it anyway. This will be a new query. And it's going to return an array of team members. So we'll do our query decorator, and it's going to return the way the syntax works. So you probably saw it earlier when I was showing off the Swagger docs. Use the tuple syntax, passing in the class to denote that it's an array of that type, because that exists at runtime, whereas going like the TypeScript definition for an array, that does not exist at runtime. So we're saying it's a query that returns an array of team members, and we'll call this one team members by office, maybe. That sounds reasonable to me. And let's take in the office argument. Now that office argument is of type office, and office is just an enum of the available offices. And what we want that to do, it'll be a promise that resolves into a team member array. And because we already have the function for it, it already exists in the REST endpoint. We don't have to author that. We can just return this vehicle service dot get vehicles, and we'll pass in office. So really, that should be done. I'll come back in here. This should have been a live reload. So if we go query, we don't have it yet. Just let me double check that did compile. That did compile. Let's reload then. And we have team members by office, which takes in an office. And of course we get our IntelliSense. And what do we want back? Let's just take in ID, office, and name. Get rid of that old query because we're not doing that anymore. Boom, all our team members in the Forest City office. Or if we want to do KW, boom, all of our members in KW. So that one really didn't necessitate much debugging because we're just plugging in another resolver. At the same time, let's do the opposite side of it, adding that extra method to our vehicle controller. This one gets a little bit more involved, as we need to say what it's going to expect back. GraphQL is a little bit more limited. It's normally a 200 response code that will contain your data and or errors as keys. So let's say add a get vehicle. Oh, no, wait, sorry. Yeah, get vehicle. We'll call it that. Why not? Which takes in a param called office. And it'll also take in an ID. Which, how do we want to architect this one? Pass that in the route? That's pretty restful. So we'll go vehicles, office key, / whatever the ID is of that office member. So let's say param, call it ID. That's what we've been calling it so far. It's a string. And ultimately that should be a promise of a single team member. I've just got to check in here to make sure that that office is a real thing. We could extract that to a private function. Hell, let's do that right now. Check office. Office is a string. And let's just throw that happy check in there. All it's going to do is throw in the event that the office is invalid. Otherwise, it'll just pass through. So we'll invoke that. Check office on office, or this check office. And I put the wrong type on that. Check office, I did. And we can pass that down in here too. So it would have thrown if there's a problem. Otherwise, let's return this .vehicle service team member by ID, passing in our office and our ID. Now, I don't expect us to be getting any information on this yet in our Swagger document because we haven't told it anything about this endpoint yet. So similar to the previous one, we're going to say it's an API operation, say what the parameters are, what do we expect the OK response to look like. The errors aren't required, but if you want a more complete Swagger experience, you should probably include them. Oh, actually, that's going to be another issue. We haven't actually mapped it to anything yet. So we'll have get office and ID. At that point, we should see that we have office ID mapped in our Nest app. I'll bump that up a little. Office route or office ID route. And let's just describe this a little bit better for the Swagger docs, just so I don't have to type a lot of this out again. I'll just paste. Retrieve specific team member by ID for a given office. Takes in an office. The other API param is going to be the ID. For example, ping, it's not an enum. Valid office key provided, and team member ID matched. Team member, and if it's not found, either the office key provided was not valid or the team member ID was not found. So those being set up and our app recompiling, we should now have our new route. So we're going to try it out. Jesse has the ping ID at Forest City. So we hit that. We get back Jesse. And if we put an ID that doesn't exist, we're going to get our 404. And let's say we go over to Hammer Squad and we look for BFH. We get back Brian. So with that, we've added our new controller endpoint. We've added our new resolver. And we don't really need to be doing any debugging with that stuff, but we can add tests because we love tests. We love knowing that these things work. I don't really have a valid resolver test in here, so let's just go to our vehicle controller end to end, and let's just add one in for our get vehicle. It does quite often feel trivial to add tests after you've completed the task, but it does pay off dividends in the long run when you go to refactor. So I think we called this one, what the hell did we call that again? Get vehicle, I think it was. Yeah, we'll call it that, sure. And what kind of cases do we want to deal with here? We should probably iterate over them if we know there's several IDs that should regularly be returned. But we can start stubbing this out more trivially. So get at vehicle / let's say Forest City / ping. Probably an async function because it has to resolve. And I'm just going to really copy the core of this super test because it's a rather simple test to do. So vehicle, Forest City, ping. We expect a 200, and we expect to be Forest City value. for city value at 0, actually. I don't advise the exact way I'm going about this right now. I'm just trying to get from point A to point B as quick as possible. Normally, I'd recommend extracting that to a utility fixture you can just import into both and not pulling it directly from the service itself. So yeah, we're going to, I think I threw one too many brackets in here somewhere. So we got that one. Yes, I did. So if we pull up our tests for this one, I'm just going to do it from the debugger so I don't have to worry about the tests that no longer exist. We don't care about these breakpoints anymore. We know they're going to go through. And we've got to the Forest City resolver, though, so that's a good thing because we were asking for Forest City, and it's going to return Jesse ultimately. Angry right now because I'm probably using that port. Test API. We won't watch it. Cool, and everything's happy. I keep getting this segmentation fault because I'm defaulting to node 14, which has some issues recently. So yeah, let's take this test. So we've tested for Forest City. We should test for the other offices too, for users that exist. And then the other test case that we want to assert against is if you provided a shoddy office or if you provided a good office and a shoddy ID. So let's try setting those up. So valid office key and existing team member ID resolves to a team member. That's like a verbose, but rather clear explanation for what we want that test to be. It's a happy path. And let's just stub out invalid office key throws a 404. Actually, this would just be an event it. And we'll wrap those in a invalid scenarios. Being very conscientiously aware of how loud this mechanical keyboard is right now, and I do apologize, everyone. So invalid office key throws 404, and it throws a 404 on a valid office key, but missing unmatched user ID, we'll say. Yeah, just stub these out. Let's start with getting our other scenarios for this guy. So we're going to have what we need to do to compose this. We're going to have the key of the office we're looking for, the ID of the user, and what we expect the value to be. So let's set up those valid scenarios, we'll call them. Valid scenarios. You can do a tuple in here. I like to use objects because I like the clarity of having keys. So we'll say key, and we'll just use the variables because they're already correct, and we don't have to repeat ourselves. So key, ID, this one's going to be valid, so let's just actually pull the ID directly off the user it's supposed to match. And the value is going to be that one. So valid scenarios, let's do a for each scenario. And what that's going to result in is us invoking the if test with these variables that we're passing in. So instead of Forest City, I'm going to have to change this to be an interpolated string for this to look pretty. So scenario at key, and we're going to pass in the ID. So scenario at ID, and we'll reuse them down here. Well, actually, probably better to capture that as a variable, because we don't want to repeat ourselves. We're all good developers here. So we'll toss in the old Mr. Knish here and down here. And we expect the value to be scenario.value. I'm pretty confident about this one. Let's look at these tests. Oh, darn, I think I closed that terminal session. Let's get another one up. KW nest, yarn test API. Throw watch mode on. And everything's passing. Flying colors, 17 tests. let's add some more to this one. In fact, this is a constant. We don't need to bloat our test. We can move it outside of the test. So we've got for city key. Actually, let's move that closer to our other scenarios up here. And let's do this a couple more times. And I think if I just do this, yeah. And if I do this, hammer squad, and just like that, should have 2 more tests passing. Boom. Fantastic. So those are our happy paths. Let's do a couple unhappy paths. And that's our invalid scenarios. So invalid office key throw is a 404. We do have one similar to that one. Actually, sorry, I think it's a 422 it's supposed to throw. So click that test. And unknown provider key. And it doesn't really matter what we put in here. We know ping's going to be a valuable one, but it should just throw that error. For our tests, we should see 20 passed. Boom, 20 passed. I'm sorry that we're doing so good writing these tests. Otherwise, we'd be able to use the debugger a little bit more effectively. And then, yeah, the last one, I believe the unmatched user ID is supposed to be a 404. That makes the most sense to me anyway. Well, hell. Let's just use this same array of valid scenarios, but plug in an ID that's not the right ID. Why not? So describe, if I do a describe around invalid scenarios, describe for the office, given a various office. No, that'll probably just be it. A unmatched ID in a matched office will return 404. I think that's pretty clear. For it, moved inside, and then let's iterate over this guy. So scenario, it would have been valid, except we're going to get rid of that ID. And we're going to change it to definitely not a real ID. It should be 404, and it's not an unknown provider key that's going to be thrown. We're actually going to expect a different error at this point. But let's let it fail. Good old red-green refactoring. Maybe we can use debugging. We got 422 back, not 404. Well, hot damn. Why is that? Well, let's figure it out. So in the vehicle module, it's probably a good place to start where we know where it's coming in. So we can first make sure it's going to resolve the right thing, and then we'll poke our way through. And the only test I really care about right now is this guy. And let's ignore the other scenarios so we can have a really nicely targeted test. So if you're not familiar with Jest, there is a handy little tool where you can chain on .only, or you can start other tests with an X, and the X will mean don't run me. The .only will mean, hey, in this level, only run me. So we only want to run this describe. We only want to run invalid scenarios. And furthermore, we only care about this particular one. So debug this current Jest test. Let's get in there. All right, so we're going to resolve our office. The first one, I believe, is Forest City. So let's get in here and see what's going to happen. It should be the get team member function. You know what? I think it already failed. 422 unprocessable entity. So let's verify that we actually got the key we were expecting in there. So run it again. So the key that we are coming in with, throw a breakpoint inside the function, this result. Oh, I don't think I can. Maybe. Yeah, it's actually not getting it. Well, what are we sending back there? Let's throw a debugger in here. Do it again. So we're going get office. We don't know our key yet because this is just in the application boot. I don't want to go into those. So we're going to invoke it. Oh, am I looking at the wrong? No, actually, I think we're doing this correctly. I just have the wrong damn expectation here. 404. It's 422. We're doing 422 here. Yeah. 404 is what we expected, but we're getting 422, which I believe is what we throw in. Do we get that unprocessable entity exception? Bear with me here. Try vehicle controller test, or in here, the check office. So what we're looking at is not valid. Let's look at this again. I'll take off that module one because we don't care about boot up. We want to see the value it's checking against. So it invokes it. I forgot. It should be pulling from our scenario. Add a key. And it fails because the body that we have it checking against is for an unprocessable entity, but it's returning a 404. So this is our unprocessable. Let's do one for a not found error, except not found error expect. So given an office, we expect a 404, not found, and I'm not too worried about the office message. We might as well get that right. That's in the vehicle controller. Unknown office error. That's the one we want. So, no, not the unknown office error. Darn, sorry. Got through that. It's then going to 404 on the team member. So I'll go into the vehicle service and our team member by ID, not the abstract. Darn. For a city. This is where you'd want to make sure that your exception is fairly normalized. So in this case, it actually is, but we could have it as a function that's used in each of our different offices. We're actually throwing the same exception, but it's being hard-coded at the moment. So a handy refactor would be pulling that out so that we can assert against it in our test. So I'll show why it's not good to go this way off the bat. We'll take member by ID, not found in for a city, and we'll just throw that here for now, member by ID, and let's take in an ID found for a city. So if we pass that in to here, and we pass in our not a real ID, which we should probably capture at this point. All right, I expect the for a city one should probably pass. Don't expect any of the other ones would. Oh, not quite. Earned by ID, definitely not a real ID, not found in for a city. So not found is one word. I was so close. Almost. Perfect, everything passes. But again, we're gonna get burnt the moment we have those other scenarios because we have it being hard-coded in each of the services. So let's just normalize that. I think a good place to throw it. All of them are implementing this interface. So if that's going to be a common error, throwing it in here is probably as good as anywhere else. So let's grab that string at heart. Let's call this not team member not found exception. And I'll take in a office, which is a string. And I'll take an ID as a string, and it'll spit out the result here. So we'll put in our office here and our ID there. So now we should be able to use this in our services down here. So this one shall have Hammer Squad and give an ID. Import that. And we'll do the same in Forest City. And last but not least, in KW. Now, it is totally feasible and possible to actually just have this be a class method at a higher level, so therefore we aren't reauthoring it multiple times. But I'm not going to worry about that right now. Can't get everything perfect on one go. Sorry, this should be throwing new not found exception of that. And just to make sure that I didn't screw up, oh shoot, I should say KW. If I didn't screw up in the other ones, let's just look through those again and make sure. Throwing for a city, throwing for Hammer Squad. Cool. So with that being said, back in our test, so the key is a little bit different with this one. So I'll give it an error key. So it matches what we have. We should probably just use the key that's being used in the string, but for speed purposes, I think this will work just fine. Oh, darn. Hammer Squad, KW, and I think we had Forest City. How are these tests looking? Not quite. A unmatched ID will throw 404, unmatched user ID, definitely not found KW. I am not quite mapped correctly. So KW is KW, Forest City, Hammer Squad. You know what? Screw it. Let's just use the key. It's going to be substantially easier that way. Right. And if we go back into Forest City, let's not say that here. Let's just say Forest City key in KW service. Let's just say KW key. And in Hammer Squad, let's just call it Hammer Squad key. Yeah, now we're not introducing any new strings. We should be pretty damn close here. Not found errors. Oh, right. One more type error. We need to make sure that we're passing in scenario.key. I think I put that on the wrong side. Remember by ID, definitely not. Yep, I did put that on the wrong side. The not found error expect is going office, then scenario. And I'm going to do a preemptive boom. Boom. Cool. So that's a little bit of testing and debugging flow on the Nest side. I'm sorry I didn't have the example for the React. I definitely screwed up on a commit there somewhere. But if everyone enjoyed this, I hope to have that together for the next time we get together. Please clap.
Good job, Mike. Great job. Hey, thanks, Mike. That was great. Good job.
You're all very welcome.
There is a couple questions. You want to break into the Q&A right now, Mike?
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. So back to the Cypress. What do failure messages look like in Cypress?
Okay, that's a good question. They're red. At a very high level, they're red. I can actually pull that up here if I have one moment to get back in the call with the laptop. While I'm doing that, do you want to read off the next one?
Sure. Is the idea to have one package JSON to rule the monorepo? Can you have multiple versions of the same dependency?
The idea around it is that you don't have multiple versions of the same dependency. So that way you never run into a headache of version mismatches. I don't think that it's possible to have multiple versions of the same package in an NX repo. You'd have to somehow be able to define the same package multiple times in a package JSON, which I think is fundamentally not possible. And I can get back in here now. Wheat will do one more screen share. So yeah, this is running the integration tests in watch mode right now. Things are all happy. Let's say I replace the application key with one that doesn't work. So we're going to force a failure. So let's say that plus an S. An S will definitely be wrong for that key. It's looking here. It punched it in. Oh, darn. It's definitely red. So our test gets a red X on it. We get a warning where commands failed. We get a call out exactly which assertion failed in the flow. And I hope that's sufficient to answer that question of what failures look like.
Another question. Can you tokenize errors?
Can you tokenize the errors? I assume we're talking about the API responses instead of what was coming back pre-canned from what was being thrown. I think that's my understanding of the question. You can definitely throw interceptors on what's being sent back for your errors. Right now, we're just allowing it to propagate with the native Nest pipeline.
All right. So that concludes our Q&A. Another big thank you to Mike. Thanks so much for speaking. It's always awesome.
Happy to contribute.